When you think about the first women to get the vote, you probably think of the suffragettes in the UK, right? They fought for decades, and finally, in 1918, some women got the right to vote. But it wasn't until a full decade later, in 1928, that all women gained equal voting rights. But what if I told you that halfway across the world, a different story was unfolding? Let's travel back to New Zealand in the late 19th century. New Zealand, then under British rule, held its first parliamentary elections way back in 1853. But just like in Britain, voting was a privilege, not a right. Your age, race, sex, and social status determined if you had a say. If you weren't a wealthy, land-owning man of European descent, you were pretty much out of luck. But things were about to change, and fast. In the second half of the 19th century, New Zealand started to open up the vote. First, it was extended to gold miners, regardless of their ethnic background. Then, in a landmark move, the indigenous Maori people were granted the vote, and special parliamentary seats were even created for them in 1867. By 1879, the country had achieved universal male suffrage. Every man, from European settlers to Maori, could now vote. But what about the women? This period saw huge changes for women in New Zealand. Better access to education and new opportunities began to challenge the old-fashioned idea that a woman's place was only in the home. A powerful movement for women's suffrage was gaining momentum. And at its heart was an incredible woman named Catherine Shepherd. Originally from Britain, she helped lead the New Zealand branch of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, a key organization in the fight for the vote. They weren't just asking politely. They were organizing, petitioning, and making their voices heard. Support for the cause grew within Parliament during the 1870s and 80s. However, the ruling Liberal government was divided. One of their most powerful members, Richard Seddon, was fiercely against women's suffrage. When he became the Premier of New Zealand in April 1893, it seemed like a massive setback. The future for women's voting rights looked bleak. But the movement had built a groundswell of support that was simply too big to ignore. Year after year, petitions had been presented to Parliament. Earlier attempts had failed, but the latest one was a behemoth, signed by nearly 32,000 people. That was almost a quarter of the adult European female population of New Zealand at the time. It was a clear, undeniable message from both men and women. A bill to grant women the vote was introduced and passed through the lower house of Parliament. The final hurdle was the upper house, the Legislative Council. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. Premier Seddon, still determined to stop the bill, tried to pressure members of the council to vote against it. He thought he could manipulate the outcome, but his heavy-handed tactics backfired spectacularly. Annoyed by his interference, a couple of councillors who had previously opposed the bill changed their votes just to spite him. The bill passed by a razor-thin margin, 20 votes to 18, and just like that, on September 19, 1893, New Zealand became the first self-governing nation in the world to grant all women the right to vote in parliamentary elections. It was a monumental victory for women's rights, sending ripples across the globe. Of course, the journey wasn't over. It would be another 40 years before the first woman, Elizabeth McCombs, was elected to the New Zealand Parliament. And it wasn't until 1997 that Jenny Shipley became the country's first female Prime Minister, completing a journey for women that had taken over a century. So while the UK's fight was iconic, let's not forget the trailblazers from New Zealand who showed the world what was possible. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this piece of history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.